The Essence Hunters, Part 3. They galloped into the first group of trees. Branches whipped past Darian's face. He ducked and held onto Aliana's shoulders. "Hold harder on my waist," she shouted. Gingerly he put his arms around her middle. Immediately Hensa swerved to avoid a tree. The sudden movement almost spun him out of the saddle. "Hold me tighter," yelled Aliana. He felt his face go hot again as he did what she had said. "That's better. We can't have you falling off. On, Hensa! Faster! Faster!" The air was filled with shouts. "To your left! Ho there! Ho! That way! Follow! Follow on! Faster! Into the river! Hold hard at it now, boys! We have him, sir! We have him!" Aliana drove her heels into Hensa's sides and pulled sharply on the left rein. The horse gave a short grunt and swerved around a clump of shrubs and long grasses. Darian leant into the turn. His teeth clenched together in a grin at the sudden thrill of the chase. "That's better," said Aliana. "Lean with me and keep your head down." In spite of his excitement, his conscience suddenly stabbed at him. They were really hunting now. Not just essence hunting to take a feather or some fur. They were actually chasing down a living creature. The Peggiar had scared him earlier, but he knew that he didn't want to see it killed. "What happens when we find it?" he yelled through the rush of wind. "We fire flares up, scare it off, chase it even further away, and make it unlikely to come back near the city. Will not kill it." She twisted back to look at him. She looked appalled. "Lords, no, is that what you thought?" "No, good, I didn't want—" He felt confused and he couldn't explain himself. He didn't want her to think that he was expecting to see the animal killed, or worse still, that he wanted to. It didn't matter though. She was already focused on the track again. "You'd better keep your head down." He looked on ahead and could see why. In front of them the trees grew more thickly. Low branches hung down over the track. The other riders were already rushing through. Darian had a glimpse of Mattian swinging down easily into his saddle while he was lying alongside Zarak's flanks. He could only just avoid a branch that threatened to sweep him to the ground. Darian's stomach churned with fear and he thought he would be sick. He could never balance like that. He knew that he would fall and be trampled. "Down!" Alianda yelled again. In the same instant he felt her tilt right over, just as Mattian had done, down to the right. Darian felt himself thrown off balance. In a jolt of terror he knew he was falling. Too late to think about it, he just had to do as she said. Heart hammering, he dug his knees into the horse and copied her, hanging down to the side. Keeping one hand on the reins, Aliana reached behind with her other hand and gripped onto him. They were both now hanging sideways, almost horizontally, down near Hensa's galloping legs. Leaves and twigs snapped past their heads as they raced on. For the second time that day, he felt his face cut by thorns and branches. He closed his eyes tightly and tried to shrink his head even further down onto his shoulders, terrified of what was still ahead. With every hoofbeat he felt himself jolted further and further out of the saddle. He let go of Aliana for an instant to grab onto Hensa's mane. This felt more secure, but he knew he couldn't hold on for much longer. In a blur he realised Aliana must be much stronger than she looked, and much stronger than he was. She was still holding onto him tightly with just one hand. It was as if she couldn't even notice the effort, but already the muscles in his own arms were screaming at him to let go. And then, in a final flurry of leaves, they were out of the snatching branches and onto the open space once more. Aliana quickly scrambled back into a secure position. Then he felt another hand on his back, and he was hoisted upright. Opening his eyes, he saw Mattian galloping alongside them. It was he who had pulled him back into Hensa's saddle. He grinned at Darian. "Great fun, eh?" he shouted into the wind. Darian just nodded. He had no breath left to reply. Aliana spurred on Hensa to even greater speed. He heard her laugh with delight as they surged at full gallop, sweeping ahead of Mattian and Zarak. Zarak whinnied in dismay at being left behind. Directly ahead of them the ground dipped away steeply. Even now the riders showed no sign of slowing down. If anything, the horses seemed to go even faster as they plunged down the hillside towards the river below. Darian's teeth banged together as the horse's lurching movement down the steep slope threw his head backwards and forwards on his shoulders. Bargoth and Dross were already in the water, their steeds splashing excitedly in the shallows. Darian's sight was blurred and dizzy for a moment after the headlong jostling and shaking. He peered ahead and became aware of another rider on the far side of the river. This figure waved at them urgently. It was Jorian. He had ridden a little further upstream, and now he was near to a bend in the river. He held a long flare stick in his hand, ready to light. "There! I can see it," Aliana said. Sure enough, on the far side of the bank, only 20 or 30 metres away from Jorian, Darian saw the unmistakable red and grey flash of the Pedgiar. As they slowed at the bottom of the slope, he looked at it properly for the first time. The creature was beautiful. Even in the fear and exhilaration of the chase, the sight of it took his breath away. There was something majestic and noble about the way the Pedgiar turned its wide head towards them. The bright yellow eyes fixed on him for an instant as the big cat panted with exhaustion. He saw its striped sides going in and out as it breathed heavily. The others had seen it too. With a jubilant shout, Jorian pushed ahead into the middle of the river. One hand was still holding the flare. Then Jorian let go of the reins completely. He reached inside his tunic with his other hand. Darian guessed he was going to light the flare. He marvelled at how this boy, not much older than he was, managed to keep his balance on the horse by just gripping with his knees. The Pedgiar gathered the last of its strength and leapt away. Jorian grabbed the reins again and galloped after it, his flare still held at the ready. Bargoth and Dross were close behind him. Darian lost sight of the riders as they rounded the bend in the river. Aliana pulled her horse to a stop at the edge of the water. "Too late," she said. "Jorian won't wait. He'll scare it off straight away before we get there." Sure enough, a few seconds later, Darian heard a fizzing, hissing sound shooting upwards. It was followed by a bright flash in the sky as the flare went off. It blinded him for a moment. He could understand why it would scare off any creature. Zarak's heavy hooves splashed down into the river just behind them. Matin was still gasping for breath after the chase. "Did I miss him?" "We all did. Jorian chased him off around the river bend." "Oh, that's a shame. I would have liked to have had a closer look." Jorian and Dross were already riding back towards them. "Success?" Matin asked them. "Of course. What did you expect?" Jorian said. "It won't bother us again. Bargoth is just making sure that it's gone for good with its tail between its legs, eh?" Matin said quickly. Good. Well done, Jorian." He turned towards Aliana. "Come along. We'd better get Darian back home." They turned their horses back up the hill and sped off towards the walls of the city that had just begun to glow with the fires of the early evening lanterns. As usual, Besker, the neighbour's dog, started growling at him as he approached his home. Darian could never turn the street corner before it sensed him and started snarling. Its barking would grow louder and louder as he approached. Normally the dog made him nervous, but tonight he was too distracted to be bothered by it. He didn't even grumble his usual quiet Besker as he trudged past and opened his own door. The interrogation began immediately. "Where have you been?" "Hunting, Mother." "Until this time? I'm sorry. Sorry's a word that comes too easily for you sometimes, my boy. But I was..." "And so is but. Look at the state of your face. All those cuts. And your hands, too. What have you been up to? You're filthy with dust and blood. And the Lords know what else. Go and wash, right now." He knew that arguing was useless. In any case, he didn't want to get his mother into a worse mood than she was already. If he could, he wanted to avoid any sort of conversation with her. He didn't want her to give her the chance to ask how his day had gone. And he certainly didn't want her to ask to see what he had caught in his jar. If only he could get to his own room and hide the broken pieces away. Perhaps then he could find a way of fixing it before she noticed that it was missing. He made his way to the basin at the far side of the room. Their cottage only had 3 rooms, the main living, cooking and eating space, and 2 sleeping rooms at the back. The privies were outside, behind a long wall, and they were shared with 4 other cottages in their row. The wash basin was close to the curtain of his own sleeping room. I'll just put my things back here first, he said as he ducked through his curtain. His mother wasn't listening, though. He breathed a sigh of relief as he placed the cloth bag carefully under his bed frame. Kneeling down, he pushed it right to the back, into the darkest corner he could reach. Straightening up, Darian pulled the blanket across the top of the bed so that it hung down to the floor, covering the bag even more. He turned quickly and stepped back to the curtain. Pulling it slightly to one side, he peered out, hoping against hope that his mother hadn't noticed anything strange about his behaviour. It struck him that she might be surprised at him actually tidying something away without being nagged about it first. But he needn't have worried. She was still busying herself at the table, starting to ladle some thick vegetable broth into their bowls. It didn't look as if she'd even noticed that he'd gone out of the room. "Hurry up and wash your hands. Supper's getting cold already. I've waited long enough for you today." Darian breathed a sigh of relief. She was thinking about supper, not about him. Perhaps he was going to get away with this after all. After washing his hands in the bowl, he came to help finish setting the table. His mother was still talking. "I know that sometimes I nag at you when I go on, Darian, but I want the best for you. You know I think so much about how you remind me of your father." How could he know that? She had never compared him to his father before, and he had never felt less like his father than he did now, skulking around, keeping secrets, scared of his own shadow. Her comments made him feel guilty. His father had been brave, confident, strong, the exact opposite of how he felt about himself. "I want you to get on in this world, Darian," his mother continued. "Your father was a respected man, a pulver guard that everyone liked, working for some of the most important people in the city. We were doing well until he—" Her voice fell away. She didn't need to say anything else. He knew what she was thinking about. His father had been killed while on duty. No one knew the exact details of what had happened that night, they said, but when his friends had brought his pale blue cloak to their door the next morning, along with a medal for his bravery, they told him that he had last been seen chasing an intruder from the city Gari gates, a bulky figure armed with several weapons, intent on murder. His father's body had never been found, and at his funeral they'd buried an empty coffin, covered by that same pale blue cloak. Darian knew that he would never have such bravery. He could not challenge and chase an armed man. He daren't even speak up for himself properly in class, or even tell his mother about his clumsiness that day. The conversation over dinner turned to silence as he and his mother lost themselves in their own thoughts. It would soon be the first anniversary of his father's death. Perhaps that's what had been on his mother's mind. Perhaps that's why she'd started to speak to him like this. As soon as things were tidied away, he excused himself and hurried through the curtain back to his own room. He took down his lantern from the shelf above his bed. Reaching for the matches sitting next to it in a little tray, he struck one of them against the rough edge of the bedpost. Guarding the flame with his cupped hand, he lit the oily wick inside the lamp. The glow grew quickly and filled his sleeping room with a warm orange light. Placing the lantern on the table, he returned to his curtain, making sure that it was closed properly. He knew that his mother wouldn't come in without asking. Now that he was 13, she was aware that he needed his own privacy, and so he dared to lift the bag from its hiding place under the bed. With his heart hammering, he undid the cords. He paused for a moment before taking out the broken pieces. He listened carefully to the noises in the other room, wanting to make sure that his mother was getting ready for bed. As he listened, he heard her yawn and counted the heavy footsteps as she walked outside to the privies. From next door, Beskar gave his usual deep, growling bark. Darian started imagining what his neighbour's dog would do if he came up against a fully grown Pedjar. That would shut up the stupid beast once and for all. He grinned at the thought.